Welcome to another episode in the Jarring Science Club. I'm your host, Brenda. And today we're going to be learning about how oil spills can hurt the ocean and the creatures that live in or near the ocean, like fish, birds, and even humans. Here's what you'll need. A jar filled about halfway with water, some cocoa powder, some vegetable oil, some cotton balls, some feathers, a paper towel. You'll also need a sponge. All right, let's get started. We're gonna make our crude oil by mixing vegetable oil and cocoa powder. We don't need a lot of oil for this experiment. That's probably plenty. And now we're gonna toss in the cocoa powder. All right, let's give that a good mix. All right, now you can see our crude oil in there. That does not look great. Now here is our ocean, so to speak. And we are going to try and make an oil spill and see which method cleans it up the best. So first, let's spill some oil. And it spills. Oh no, look at that spill. Now we have all that dirty, contaminated water inside of our ocean. How are we gonna clean that up? What is the best way? Now, typically there are 4 types of methods that are used to clean up oil spills in the ocean. There's what's known as a boom containment system, which is basically a barrier or ring that they put around the oil spill to prevent it from spreading. You can tell that oil likes to spread very quickly. Let's see if we can take a look at that a little closer. See, it's already almost covered the entire surface of the jar while I've been talking. There's also what's known as absorbers, which just try to absorb the oil. There's dispersants, which break apart the oil and make it easier to clean up. And there's what's known as skimmers, which are boats and machines that just come around and get the oil up off the water before it gets too far out. So we're gonna test a few of these methods and see which one works best, and if there is a particular method for cleaning up oil that will work to clean up our crude oil the best. First, we have a sponge, and this sponge is a combination of a boom cleaning method and an absorber, because it will absorb, but it also acts as a barrier for the oil to prevent it from going any farther. So let's see how that does inside of our jar here. We did get some of the oil, so that's a pretty effective cleanup system there. We also have a cotton ball to represent an absorber here, so let's see how that works. It's not very effective. It's kind of making a mess. It's getting some oil up, but it's kind of spreading it and smearing it around, which is not very effective. And if you were to use this sort of cleanup method in the actual ocean, it would take a really long time. And it would take a lot of cotton. Here is another absorbent method, just a paper towel. That's kind of making a mess too. It's actually the least effective of all of them, I would say. Now I'm gonna add a little more oil since the sponge cleaned up so much. Now we're gonna try adding a dispersant, which is soap. So I'm gonna put a little bit of soap in this water and we're gonna see what happens. So the soap made the oil travel to the edges of the jar, and it's almost completely clean from the surface now. Now all that's left are the little oil globs trapped at the bottom here. So the soap actually really helped contain the oil. So let's see what happens when we put in one of our best containment method, again, the sponge. Let's see what happens when we put the sponge in the water. Now the water is still incredibly contaminated, but the sponge and the soap combo got rid of the water on the surface almost completely. But you can see that the soap dispersed it throughout the water, and it's actually made the water more contaminated looking than it was at first. Let's see what happens when we give it a stir. That is some contaminated water for sure. Let's try adding a bit more soap and see what happens. That didn't make much difference at all. What if we put in a cotton ball at this point? Well, the same thing happened in our experiment as what happens in the ocean. If you wait too long to clean up an oil spill, it spreads too much and it's a lot harder to clean. That's why it's really important to get to spills as soon as they happen, or as close to as soon as they happen, so that they can be cleaned up and contained right away. Otherwise, they disperse and they completely destroy the health of the water where they are. Now we're gonna do a little test to see how the contaminated oil, if crude oil gets onto a bird, for example, how hard or easy that is to clean up. So we've got a feather coated in crude oil here. And even if we dry it off, it's heavy and greasy, and a bird would have a really hard time flying with a wing coated in oil like this. So let's see if adding some soap and cleaning the bird helps. Let's put some water on it from our sponge here to help clean. So we were able to get most of the oil off of our feather, but it's still not 100% back to where it was. It's still dirty, it's still a little affected by the oil, and any bird would it would take a bird a while to recover from exposure to oil. That's why it's really important to try to reduce the amount of oil spills that we see in the ocean and clean them up right away so that it doesn't harm wildlife. Here's the science. In our experiment, we simulated a crude oil spill and explored some of the ways that are used to clean those up. Now, obviously, the best way to keep oil out of the oceans is to try to eliminate the spread of oil in water to begin with, but that can't always work. We can't always prevent accidents. So scientists and engineers and other people have created these containment methods and cleanup methods for oil that can help clean up these oil spills. Because as we saw in our experiment, if we don't get this oil cleaned up, it can be extremely harmful to wildlife, to fish, to birds, plants, and even to humans. So it's important to have these tools at our disposal to help clean up these oil spills when they occur. There isn't necessarily a right way to clean up an oil spill, at least not in our current cleanup methods. But there are a variety of techniques that are used, and we'll talk about some of those right now. So there are typically about 4 different ways that are used to clean up oil spills. There's absorbers, which try to soak up the oil and remove it out of the ocean. There is a boom cleanup method, which is basically a sort of fence that's placed around an oil spill to keep it from spreading further and to keep it away from the coast where it does a lot of damage. Often boom containment systems are used in conjunction with other oil cleanup methods. There are chemical dispersants that are used to help kind of break up the oil and keep it from being as harmful to wildlife and the ocean. Although they're called chemicals, they are a lot safer for wildlife and the ocean and animals than the oil itself. Skimmers are also used to clean up oil, which are usually deployed by boats and other sort of floating devices that skim the oil off the top of the water and try to get it out of the way. When an oil spill is small, it's easier to do this, but when it starts to get larger, it's harder to use that kind of system. Sometimes companies also set fire to small oil spills to remove it from the ocean and burn it as fuel temporarily to get it out of the way fast. In our experiment, we used a combination of methods to try to get the oil spill cleaned up. The cotton balls that we tried were a type of absorber. The sponge was a combination of a boom and an absorber because it helps prevent the oil from spreading beyond the barriers of the spill, but also soaks it up. Then we used a dispersant, which is the soap, to help break up the oil and make it easier to clean up. It's a lot easier to use the absorbent materials to soak up the oil once the dispersant has been applied. As you could see in our experiment, even the best cleanup methods aren't entirely effective. When we clean the oil off of the feather, there was still some color and some oil left behind. That's why it's really important to try to prevent these accidents from happening. But it's helpful to have these cleanup tools at our disposal for when accidents do occur. That's it for today. See you next time.